again. I'm Valerie Jarrett. I'm president of the Obama Foundation, and I'm so delighted to know that so many of my former colleagues from both the 2008 and 2012 campaign, as well as the 8 years President Obama was in office, are joining us for this very special moment. As you all know, tomorrow is the formal groundbreaking for the President's Center that's going to be located on the south side of Chicago, along Lake Michigan, between the University of Chicago and the Museum of Science and Industry, a 19.3-acre site that is in the heart of Jackson Park. We'll have an incredible museum that will tell the story of whose shoulders President and Mrs. Obama stand, the time that he was in office, and the hard work that lies ahead. And we hope that everyone comes, looks at it as a beacon of hope, but also a catalyst for change that each one of us is capable of making, beginning here in Chicago and rippling across the world. We're not waiting for the center to be completed, although it will contain a forum building and a public library and an athletic field and walking trails and a vegetable garden, all of which will be constructed over 4 years, but the work has already begun. And the reason why you all are here tonight is because many of the shoulders upon which he stands are joining right here. Earlier today, President Obama spent some time with our brand new class of scholars from the University of Chicago. And he told the story of how important Iowa was to his candidacy and how his field organizers were on the ground for months doing what? Getting to know the community, listening to people, understanding what they cared about, so that when President Obama showed up, a lot of the hard work was already done. And many of you were a part of that, not just in Iowa, but all across our country, not to mention those of you who served in his administration. As he left office, one of his last gatherings of his senior staff, he said what he was so proud of is how well we served, no scandals, no controversy, simply focusing on the importance of we, beginning with we the people, we shall overcome, and of course, yes, we can. And so before I turn it over to David Plouffe, who you all know was the campaign manager, he was a senior advisor in the White House. He's on the board of directors of the Obama Foundation right now, a friend to many of you. But before I turn it over, as though you need any inspiration, which I know you don't, we want to share a short video that I think captures the essence and the core, the values of what President and Mrs. Obama are going to do with their center and what they are doing right now with the programs that are up and running. So let's share the video, and then David, I'll turn it right over to you for a conversation with President Obama.
There are places and moments in America where this nation's destiny has been decided. Selma is such a place. You are America, unconstrained by habit and convention, unencumbered by what is, because you're ready to seize what ought to be. The single most powerful word in our democracy is the word we. We the people. We shall overcome. Yes, we can. Oh, what a glorious task we are given to continually try to improve this great nation of ours.
Part of the reason why we thought that this excerpt was appropriate to be etched in the building itself is because it speaks to the priorities of the foundation. Our goal is not to just create a monument to my presidency, but rather to describe for anybody who visits how Michelle and I and so many others stood on the shoulders of those who had fought the good fight before us. So my hope is that in the same way that John Lewis gave me the sense of meaning and purpose, that Michelle and I are able to pass that on, because it's our daughter's generation. The goal of the Obama Presidential Center is for them to be able to identify that as an institution and a space that supports them in their vision for the future.
We honor those who walked so we could run. We must run so our children soar, and we will not grow weary, for we believe in this country's sacred promise.
Everybody, it's David Plouffe. What a stirring way to start this conversation with all of you and President Obama. In the registration for this call, we asked the alumni to share, if they would, more about what you're up to, and also to highlight any of the alumni you know who are doing inspiring and impactful work out in their communities. And it probably doesn't surprise you that so many of you, pretty much all of you, are making an incredible mark in your communities, in your country, and in the world. And we're going to hear from some of those great alumni in a moment. But first, we're going to hear from for some of us current, and for all of us former boss, President Barack Obama.
Thanks, David. And thank you, Valerie. And thanks, everybody, for joining me. I'm in a familiar setting, which is in front of a monitor in a hotel room, which kind of describes the setting for much of my candidacy and presidency, despite the fact that it's a gorgeous day outside in Chicago. But even though we're not, in the same room, look, I will confess the main reason we wanted to do this was because I miss all of you guys. Some of you over the last 4 years, I've been able to see in person. We've, run into each other in various events. You guys have helped us on some of the foundation work. But as I've said many times publicly, when people ask me, what is it that I miss most about the presidency? It is not Air Force One, although I really like that plane. And, it's not the pomp and circumstance of the presidency. It's the extraordinary privilege I had of working with some of the most dedicated, motivated, idealistic, selfless, hardworking, brilliant people that I'll ever hope to come across. And, in some ways I made up for not seeing all of you on a regular basis over the last few years by writing a book, which really was me writing about you as much as it was writing about me and all the people who contributed and dedicated themselves to trying to change America for the better. Now, as much as I've missed you, I've been keeping up with what all of you are doing. In some cases, you've got some very high-profile alumni, a number who've been elected to Congress. In the Biden administration, now have somebody like a Deb Haaland, who organized in New Mexico and now is the Secretary of Interior. First person of first American ancestry to hold that critical post. You have people like Jean Lambrew, who was really one of the quiet forces behind the Affordable Care Act, and now suddenly she's running healthcare in Maine. But as David indicated, one of the fun things about this little virtual reunion we're having is, we got a chance to hear from so many of you who are doing stuff, that maybe isn't in the papers, but is just as impactful and meaningful. Folks who ran for city auditor, or people who started organizations to deal with domestic violence. So many of you wrote about how the campaign or the the work you did in the White House or in various agencies put you on a path of just being accustomed to making a difference, and that you have sustained that and brought more people into that process, so that like Robert Kennedy's pebble in a pond, there have been these enormous ripple effects from your work and your actions over these years. So for those of you who I've had a chance to see in person, those of you who've worked directly with me in helping to build to this moment where we're breaking ground on the Presidential Center, I couldn't be more grateful. Some of you are still at the foundation. Some of you have moved on, like Wally Adeyemo, who's now number 2 at Treasury and helping to run the global economy, and was Valerie's predecessor as president of the foundation. But one of the things I'm hoping to use this occasion for is to jumpstart us thinking creatively about ways in which I can continue to see you guys and be in conversations with you and support you in the work that you're doing. Some of you don't entirely qualify as young. I mean, witness Plouffe with his gray beard. On the other hand, a bunch of you I know, have started families and kids, and you're building your own organizations. And I think the one thing that I've always tried to communicate, but this is a good occasion to reiterate, I have an enormous stake in your success, because I've always felt as if one of the most lasting legacies of our campaign and the presidency is to unleash a whole bunch of really effective do-gooders on the world, and that the work you do will be part of that legacy for years and years to come. So I'm hopeful that also we're able to tighten up ways in which you guys can support each other, whether it's because you guys are living in the same city or you're working on similar issues, because the relationships and being in the foxhole together, and the hard-earned wisdom that so many of you accumulated over the years, that's not something that we did on our own individually. It's something that we did collectively and that we shared, and we need to continue to support each other going forward. That I think is one of the greatest resources that any of you have, is that set of relationships that you can continue to tap into for years to come. So with that, David, I know that we've got some ways in which we can hear for some folks and pepper me with questions, and try not to be too tough on me.
Well, we're going to hear from great alums, but I want to follow up on something that you mentioned in the interview and the video. So first of all, this is a long and I guess unlikely journey to this moment. I'm reminded 14 years ago, I think to the day, a poll came out having us 3rd in Iowa, 30 points down in the national polls. And so then the notion that you'd be breaking ground on your presidential center as a 2-term president 14 years later is unlikely. But you mentioned it's not just going to be a monument or museum. And as much as we're all going to love going to Chicago and reminiscing and celebrating about the work we did together, you really see this as a living, breathing way, really to be a catalyst for people to get inspired and continue to make change in their communities. I'd love for you to share with the alumni a little bit more about how you see that vision coming into reality.
Well, look, you and I have talked about this. I've shared this in other public forums, but it's worth reiterating. When I was about to leave the White House, let's say 3-4 months before I left, I had to spend some time thinking about what's the next stage, other than just
making up for a lot of lost time with Michelle. And where could I have the greatest impact, or what would be my highest and best use? And there are a lot of issues I care about and a lot of issues that I continue to work on. And that includes, supporting our current president and the Democratic Party. But the thing that I figured I could do best, or would be most important for me to do, would be to think about how to inspire, recruit, train, mentor, motivate the next generation of leaders. The same energy that we tapped into in 2008, that's still out there. You don't want to have to count on a campaign to help motivate that, because not everybody's going to be involved in campaigns. Some people will be working on issues. Some people are going to be, doing investigative journalism. Some folks are expressing it through the arts. Some folks want to do very local work in terms of improving a school or dealing with a criminal justice challenges in a city. And so I thought, look, that should be the mission of the foundation, is creating a platform to support them, that next generation of leaders, and sustaining it over a long period of time. The center, I think, the presidential center is hopefully going to be a physical manifestation of that mission. Look, I'll be honest with you. When I was watching the video, it's a good speech. There's like some stirring music in the background, but it was a reminder to me of the dangers of nostalgia and being backwards looking. And I'm not old enough to want to just be in my rocking chair and think back to glory years. More importantly, that's not useful, right? So the Presidential Center will have a museum. There will be an entire section about the campaign in Iowa. We'll have a replica of the Oval Office and Michelle's gowns and all that stuff, and discussion of various issues like the economic crisis. But even in the museum, what we're going to be doing is setting up a series of exhibits showing the degree to which we were just a continuation of a thread, a running thread in American history of people, ordinary folks from the bottom up, expanding the definition of we the people, expanding the franchise, working for workers' rights and creating better working conditions, empowering women so that they are full citizens, addressing environmental degradation. And the basic argument, the story we want to tell is that progress in this country and around the world has always started with a bunch of folks who see an injustice or see a wrong and decide, what, we're going to take responsibility and do something about it, and we're going to come together and build movements and test out ideas to make things better, so that as visitors go through there, we want at the end of the day for them to come out, and we're going to constantly be prompting questions about, well, what are you going to do? And I want every visitor who goes through there to be asking themselves at the end of it, all right, how do I get involved? How do I make an impact, whether it's in my local community or on an issue that I care about? And that's also why we're building a campus rather than just one structure, because we're going to have an auditorium, classrooms, recording studios, a branch of Chicago Public Libraries, because we want a constant swirl of activity
and a lot of our programming where we're identifying top young leaders around the country and around the world. This is a place where they can convene, work with folks who've done the work they're doing, exchange ideas, find cohorts that can support them. The last point I guess I'll make, David, on this is at a moment of great disruption, when I think all of us are worried about some trend lines out there, the degree to which people's fears and in some cases legitimate concerns about globalization and technology and migration and sort of social media, all these things are converging. What we've seen is that there's one possibility in which we work through that and come out on the other side more unified, more inclusive, more just, more environmentally sustainable in terms of how we organize our economy and our society. And there's another path in which we become more divided, more tribal. If we're not paralyzed, then potentially we go down a path in which we start seeing a fraying of our democratic institutions. We're seeing some of those troubling trends internationally, domestically. The antidote to that, in my view, the antibody to that is those of us who believe in democracy, who believe in participation, who believe in citizenship, who believe in the marketplace of ideas and the inherent dignity of all people, and inclusion and diversity and if we believe in that spirit, then we've got to have institutions that support it. And my hope is that the center will be one of those critical institutions that fight on behalf of and train people to support those values and that spirit that hopefully all of us feel animated our campaigns and my presidency.
Well, it'll be a center and campus for change makers at a time the world's probably needed them more than ever. So you mentioned 2008. Our first alum we're going to hear from is from the 2008 campaign. That's when she started her journey with you. Stephanie Reed joined the campaign as a field organizer in Easton, Pennsylvania. And congratulations, Stephanie. If I recall, you and your colleagues won Northampton County by 12 points in 2008. You guys did a great job.
You knew Plouffe knew that off the top of his head, by the way. He didn't even have to look it up, probably.
It is Northampton, Pennsylvania. Yeah, right. So, but when Stephanie started the campaign, she had a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. And she mentioned to us she was only able to join at that time because another volunteer's daughter agreed to babysit her kids, really that sense of community that made that work. She went on to be a regional field director in the 2012 campaign, spent several years at Organizing for Action. For the last 5 years, she's worked for the city of Philadelphia, where she currently serves as the executive director of Philly Counts, where she led the city's census efforts in 2020 and now supports the city's COVID vaccine education campaign. So Stephanie, you've been very busy serving your community, but I'll turn it over to you. What is your question for President Obama?
Thank you, David. Good evening, Mr. President.
Hey.
It's such an honor. I'm sorry, I'm going to try to pull myself together. It's an honor and a privilege to get to speak to you tonight. And I feel like my question is right in line with what you were just speaking about. So my time in OFA really showed me how powerful it can be when you give people the tools and the support that they need so that they can create the change that they want to see in their communities. And as David mentioned, after OFA, I went on to work for the city, and I have been working to engage people around safety, health, making sure that people have the representation and the funding that they're owed. And we're seeing right now a lot going on with our democracy. We're not the first country to experience attacks on democracy. So I'm wondering if you'll talk a little bit more about what are some things that you think we should be doing to fortify our democracy at all levels and lift up the voices of those who stand to be most impacted.
Well, before I answer, how are the kids?
They're good. They're great. They're in high school. You know, they were like in backpacks, little babies. And yeah, they're junior and a sophomore. So like yours, they grow up quickly, don't they?
I know. Well, look, I don't think there's a silver bullet. You know, one of the things that I always believed about this country and our democracy is that, you know, there are a bunch of civic habits that we build up, and then sometimes we get into bad habits. Sometimes there are sort of forces that weaken those habits. And look, I've said before publicly that there are certain structural problems we have in our democracy that have to be addressed. Political gerrymandering, which tends to divide us because it makes congressional districts and state legislative districts so safely one party or the others that those who are in office either are able to protect themselves from accountability or are only accountable to their own party, which tends to pull them in one direction or the other. The Senate filibuster, that's a whole conversation we can have at some point. You know, so there are some structural things that need to happen. I would add that, you know, there's obviously legislation and major debates taking place in Washington around voting rights, which I think are going to be very important, and I'm hopeful that we can get some stuff done there. But I think the thing that I'm most interested in is how can we get people both to participate actively, but also be an effectively informed citizenry. You know, one thing that's changed even from '08 is the degree to which, because of social media and because of I think some of the fraying or the crumbling of guardrails around how information goes out into the public. You know, we now have certain portions of our populations that are operating on entirely different baselines of facts, of history, of you know how democracy is supposed to work, and so as a consequence, I think part of the answer to your question is that we've got to figure out how are we helping people to distinguish between truth and falsehood, facts and opinions. That may be partly the education system. It's partly how we think about media. I also think that we have to find ways in which people are interacting directly, and that's why organizing locally on the ground, doing the kind of work you're doing at neighborhood levels and community levels is so important. Everything that gets nationalized tends to get polarized very rapidly. It's harder to demonize the other side of a debate if you're seeing them face to face, if you're working with them on a particular project in a particular community. And I think that one of the good habits of citizenship that we're going to want to encourage at the center, and that I want to encourage you know, all of you to be thinking about is how and obviously COVID makes it more complicated, and you know, we're not through that yet, but when we're past the point where that's a major issue in terms of how we get people together, getting people face to face to work on specific problems rather than being in these national hypercharged debates that really have more to do with identity and major and cultural issues and whose teams on what side, and that are purposely oftentimes hypercharged by media or social media because it's profitable to do so. I think that's the thing that I want us to figure out how we can do more of. Part of the reason that's possible, that's important, by the way, is, you know, when you think back to our campaign in 08, we went to every state and we went to every community, partly because the primary was so long and it was such a big battle. And that was enormously beneficial because it exposed me to communities that weren't a natural constituency. It's exposed them to me. And you could then start seeing, you know, that there are common bonds here, and you're less likely to engage in stereotypes about other people and give people the benefit of the doubt. And that kind of genuine, on the ground human interaction is not something that we're seeing a lot of right now. And I think that that's why each of us individually doing that work on local levels is so important.
So everybody keep organizing. Stephanie, thank you. And here's to the Eagles beating the Cowboys tonight. So next, we're going to hear from Ashley Davis in Nashville, Tennessee. Mr. President, Ashley first joined the White House in 2011 as an associate in the Presidential Personnel Office. She later joined the PPO staff and moved to the U.S. Department of Agriculture for your second term, where her roles included White House liaison and senior advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights in the department. Today, she holds a diversity and inclusion leadership position in the private sector, and she recently completed her second term as voluntary chair of Nashville's Community Oversight Board, which is focused on police policy and community relations. So Ashley, thank you for all you've done for your country and for your state and city. Ashley, what would you like to talk to the president about?
Thank you very much, David. And good evening and greetings from Nashville, Mr. President.
It's good to talk to you, Ashley.
Absolutely. It's an honor to join this important conversation. As a queer woman of color, intersectionality is incredibly important to me. And when I think about the coalition seeking to address issues like systemic racism, trans rights, police brutality, reproductive rights, just to name a few, with there being so many others behind that, there seems to be a lot of effort to create division between the organizations representing these marginalized groups and communities. So my question is, what advice would you offer to those of us looking to build and strengthen collaboration and bring about collective progress?
Well, look, Ashley, I think that, and this is a big simplification, oversimplification, so you know, I'll offer that caveat. There's always going to be resistance when social norms and habits change. And when those who were marginalized want to be at the table. And, you know, step number one is empowering those voices that weren't at the table. And we saw during the course of my presidency, you know, the LGBTQ voices and voices of immigrants and, you know, voices of Asian Americans and you know, First Americans and others, and obviously African Americans, saying, all right, you know, we're not here hat in hand asking for charity. We intend to participate and help determine our destiny, and need to be seen and need to be heard and need to be in the room where decisions are being made. And that's going to create discomfort. And there are those who would try to exploit people's discomfort. And I don't think there's an easy recipe to avoid that. for those of us who are championing that more inclusive America, the only advice that I've given, and sometimes people aren't sure, or don't always buy this advice, but I continue to give it anyway, is, look, there's some people who are just going to say, no, we want the old hierarchies and we don't want you at the table, and there's no convincing them otherwise. And those folks in a, through organizing, mobilization, voting, creating our own organizations, et cetera, we just have to overcome their resistance, whether they like it or not. But the vast majority of Americans who, I got to know during the campaign and during my presidency, if something's new and they're uncomfortable or unfamiliar with it, it doesn't necessarily mean that they can't become comfortable with it. But we have to extend ourselves and make the effort. And we have to be able to, as someone once said, just because you're woke, you got to leave a little room to be in a conversation with people that are just waking up. And I do think that there are times where those who are on the right side of an issue don't just kind of take a beat and say, all right, rather than me assuming that because folks aren't 100% where we are, we just need to push against them. Take a beat and say, you know what, let me see if I can find some common ground with you. Let me not assume the worst. If you don't say things exactly the right way, if you don't immediately line up with the correct position on a particular issue, let me not assume ill will on your part. Let me be in a conversation with you and see if we can learn from each other. We have to maintain that space. Look, when I was running in certain rural parts of Illinois for Senate or in Iowa, culturally, there were a bunch of positions that folks had that were not in line with what I believed. But what I found was those were good people. And their attitudes changed over time, in part because I think I communicated to them, look, I respect you, even if we disagree on this. And one of the concerns I have is sometimes that we don't send that message first. We respect you, even though we disagree. That's not an argument for silencing our own pain, our own perspectives, our own views. It is an argument for being of generous spirit as we fight and struggle on behalf of the values we believe in.
Thank you, Ashley. Mr. President, that reminds me, I believe it was in your farewell speech when you were leaving office, quoting Atticus Finch and the importance of putting yourself in someone else's shoes, something we sorely need today. So next, we're going to hear from Steph Spears from Boston, Massachusetts. Steph joined the 2008 campaign as an organizer during the New Hampshire primary. We don't really want to relive that, but she went on to organize 7 states and later joined the staff of the National Security Council. And today she's CEO and co-founder of Solstice, an organization dedicated to bringing solar energy to low-income communities. Steph, welcome, and hand it over to you to ask the president a question.
Thanks so much, David, and thanks so much, Mr. President. The job that actually prepared me the most to be a CEO was working as an organizer. And I had a super volunteer. She was a grandma and she had never voted once in her entire life, yet she was so inspired by the campaign that she would take out these multiple walk packets and then come to the office and ice her knees afterwards. And so seeing that made me realize that people can actually come together and do things that they've never thought of doing before. And the scale of climate change is so massive that it requires all of us to change. And our organization is trying to put solar in the hands of low income and Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but I actually spend a lot of my time with the business community. And they'll tell you that they support justice, but their days are spent pursuing more growth, more returns, and lowering costs at all expense. Right. And I haven't seen those short-term incentives change in the last couple of years, even with all the good movement building that's been happening. Right. In case in point, the S&P 100 companies, most of them have public commitments to lower carbon emissions, but 60% of them do not support climate policy, according to a new study by Ceres. So business as usual is fueling global warming. And right. So we are only going to solve climate change when businesses define success as more than just financial returns. And how do we ensure that the business world actually changes how it does business to focus on the long-term collective good when all the incentives point to continuing business as usual?
Well, look, first of all, I'm really proud of what you're doing. And just listening to you, I was, if I needed a job, I'd see if I could come work for you. Although I'm a little past my prime, but
you're hired.
But the question you're asking is a big one, and it applies not just to climate change, although that I think is probably the most urgent existential manifestation of a broader issue, which is the market has proven to be the greatest wealth creator on earth. It has helped to raise living standards around the globe. In many ways, a market-based economy is most compatible with many of the individual freedoms that we care about deeply. But in the aggregate, there are consequences to unfettered market-based economics and capitalism that are catching up to us. And climate change is the most severe example of it, but so is ever-increasing income inequality and wealth inequality around the world. And on both fronts, by the way, although we made some progress during my presidency, I've said publicly and would continue to argue that we didn't make anywhere near enough progress. The Paris Accords was a good start, but it wasn't the end point. The economic policies we've put in place reduced some income inequality, but it didn't eliminate what has been now a 30-year trend. And I do think that there are basic policies that can make a difference. The fact of the matter is if you raise fuel economy standards, mileage standards on cars, car makers respond and their technologies change and they keep on selling cars, but over time they become more energy efficient. The same is true with refrigerators. The same is true, by the way, with respect to tax policy. There is a lot of policy work that can be done that does not require people to have a spiritual awakening, but they're simply responding to basic incentives. I do think that where I'm hopeful is not only the degree to which young voters are prioritizing this in a way that voters my age historically have said, yeah, I want a clean environment, but I don't want to pay more for gas. I think young people are much more aware and cognizant, and that's going to incentivize politicians in different ways as the years go on, although we're in a race against time. But I also think that same generation, that same cohort is thinking differently as consumers. And the degree to which consumer power, the degree to which young people, as they are entering into positions of power, start thinking about it from a shareholder perspective, an investor perspective, that the pressure points on companies to act responsibly can come not only from regulation and policy, but also from the marketplace itself. The problem is that is a slow process, and we need urgent action. And I would argue that and also, by the way, the problem with sort of consumer and investor pressure is it tends to be company by company. By definition, regulation and tax policy hits everybody, so it doesn't punish the good business actor and reward the bad business actor who's not amenable to that pressure. So I think we need all of the above. But probably the most promising thing is for us to vote our commitments around the climate change issue, and over time, hopefully sooner rather than later, we're able to change some of those regulatory and tax policies to prompt faster action than we've been getting.
Thank you, Steph. Mr. President, just hearing Steph talk about New Hampshire, it's a reminder that, you know, the journey with you hasn't all been every election ending in a victory speech and every piece of legislation passed and, you know, international climate accords and groundbreaking regulation. There were some challenging moments in there as well. I reflect just in preparation for this call, because tomorrow is going to be a celebration with the groundbreaking when the center ultimately opens in a few years. But so many tough moments too. You wrote about them in the first volume of Promised Land. I'm sure you're working on some tough moments in two. I just reflect back, if I recall, like August 2011. You know,
not my best month.
Well, yeah, it's just a reminder. It wasn't all, you know, rose petals and parades. I mean, it was, if I recall, it was the day of your 50th birthday. The monthly jobs report came out from the Labor Department. It actually said 0 on it. A piece of paper said 0. I think we thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. It was a big fat 0, as I think you put it. That was the debt ceiling debacle. No one in the country was happy with how that ended. Now we're back again. I remember us doing a bus tour in the Midwest to try and get some mojo back. Part of the tour was in Iowa. We saw so many old friends. They weren't really excited to see us either. No one was happy with what was going on, but we found a way out. And I guess whether you want to reflect on some of the challenging moments or just an approach, because I always thought one of the strengths you brought, both in campaigns and in the White House, most importantly, was when you're going through a tough challenge or had a big problem, was to be very, you know, calm about it, clinical. What are our options? Usually that wasn't like a good option and a bad option. It could be a bad and less worse option, but you'd always start with where you could improve and really diagnose the situation. I think so many alumni on the call are out there doing amazing things, but in their own organizations, it's not like everything's a straight line. You're going to have setbacks, and just some advice, either based on our shared experience or just your observations about how leaders can overcome in those moments.
Well, look, David, I mean, the truth is you and I, you know, part of how we clicked, even before we became friends, was I think we have a temperament in common, right? We tend not to get too high when things are going great, and we tend not to wet our beds, as you called it, like to call it, when things weren't going great. And I don't know about you, but for me at least, that derives from taking the long view on things. It's just a reminder that, yes, progress does not travel in a straight line. It zigs and it zags, and sometimes it goes backwards. And it also, I think, requires a weird combination of confidence, that over the long term, I'll figure it out, and humility in recognizing part of figuring it out is understanding that you're going to make mistakes and you're flawed, and you got to get better and you got to learn, and you have to have people who are smarter than you around to help you get through it. There's nothing we did that that I could say to myself, you know what, I figured that out all on my own. You think about the tough times during the campaign. Well, we were buoyed by the incredible work that was being done in Iowa. That's by a bunch of 22-year-olds. And that's, they carried us through some rough patches. The moment you just described, which I'm actually, I start volume 2 writing about the debt crisis, the previous debt crisis, and the zero jobs report, which, by the way, this is an aside. A month later, it turned out that there had been 100-something thousand jobs created. One of the banes of my existence was always they undercounted.
Right.
For some reason, the way the Labor Department was calculating jobs, and then they'd have a corrected estimate a month later, but it was too late. None of that ever got reported on. But that was a real low point in the presidency, because we thought we might be going back into economic crisis after all the work we had done to dig ourselves out of a financial crisis. But the reason I got through it was because I had a bunch of smart people around who said, well, look, yeah, this isn't great from a political perspective, but we still have confidence that we got the policies largely right and that they will prove themselves out over time. And so we just got to buckle down and see if we can communicate, if not results immediately, then at least what our values and aspirations are. And we had a bunch of conversations there. So I guess my point is that I think what's always been my salvation during tough times is an enormous confidence in the people around me. And my, I guess I'm a humanist in this sense, that belief that, this is a human enterprise. These are problems that, that humans created, which means that humans can figure it out. And we may not always figure it out on the, news cycle, and we may take some hits, but if we stay at it, and we're collaborative and make decisions based on facts and logic and reason and a breadth of perspectives, that there's no problem we can't solve. And that, it's a little bit. There was a movie a while back based on a book, The Martians. Matt Damon, he's up there. He's got a little Martian outpost in the near future, and something goes wrong, and he's got to figure out how he's going to, survive and get back to Earth. And I know that this is being covered, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but at some point he says, I've just got to science the shit out of this thing, right? And there, that attitude of, I'm just going to grind it out and figure this out, and we're going to make adjustments and have a sort of a learning loop of testing and trying things out and seeing if that works, and if it doesn't, then we'll try something else. That is, that applies not just to organizing. It doesn't just apply to politics. It's something Michelle and I have tried to communicate to our daughters, and we've done all right by it.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's particularly hard to have that patience where we don't even have news cycles anymore. It's just one constant news cycle, but it's such important advice, which is take the time, even if you take some lumps for a few days or a few hours to figure it out. Well, listen, I want to end by, if I recall back in 2009, I think this was the day after you inaugurated, we had something called the staff ball. We had a lot of people there who had worked around the country. It was probably the first time I met a lot of them. You did. And you said something that night, which is, no matter, some of you are going to come into the White House, you'll go work in an agency, some of you stay in politics, some of you are just going to go back home and live your life and do amazing things. But take the spirit of this campaign, what's possible through your life. And what was inspiring to me to see what everybody's up to is that maybe, your greatest legacy, which is all these people out here who are making progress happen in big ways and small that are changing lives, whether those people know it or not. So just some parting words for your alumni group. And thanks to everybody for joining us. It was great to be with everybody virtually. And at some point, we'll all gather again physically. But just the floor is yours, Mr. President.
Well, I think you gave a pretty good summation. That is our greatest legacy. And it's a story that's still being written. And that's why the Obama Presidential Center and the campus, it's a very specific institution that I think will be transformative in a sometimes forgotten part of a world city. I think, the work that will be done there will be really important. But I'm also convinced that it will serve as a beacon for others who are coming up behind us, who are just as idealistic, motivated, brilliant, creative as everybody who's on this video feed and help propel me into the presidency. And we want to make sure that they have that same opportunity to tap into that spirit. And that spirit is essentially a faith in each other, right? A faith that human beings of goodwill can not make things perfect, but can make things better. But it only happens when we get involved. It only happens when we listen, when we share, when we focus on what's essential and important in a culture that so oftentimes leads us to distraction with things that are not important and not lasting. And that's why I say the center is not designed to be nostalgic. We want to impart some history so that people get a sense that this is a relay race and that we didn't just show up and do the things that we're doing. As you've alluded to, today's headlines, many of them mirror or echo the same kinds of challenges we have. I was never under any illusion that by virtue of my election or my presidency, that we had solved issues like systemic racism or economic inequality or climate change. We ran our portion of the race, but what we always understood was that the race continues. And I call it a relay race, not just in passing the baton between elected officials. It's a relay race for all of us as citizens of this country and as citizens of the world at a time when we've got some big challenges. So I am looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible in the months and years to come. I'm looking forward to when we actually have a ribbon cutting, because the Obama Presidential Center was no different than the campaign or the presidency. It was not always smooth sailing, and I'm sure will not be always smooth sailing until we get to that ribbon cutting. But in the interim, remember what I said. I owe so much to all of you and care so deeply about all of you and your success. And I think you guys care about each other in that same way, and make sure that we find effective ways to support each other in our various endeavors. And make sure that we're continuing to pass on that spirit to others in our respective communities and fields. And if we do that, then I think we'll figure some stuff out. And I'm looking forward to doing that.
Well, thank you, President Obama, for those motivational words. Some hope.
Always hope.
Man, we need it these days.
Come
So
on.
thank you for, you're the hope guy.
That's I'm sticking to it. I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah, there's the alternative is too scary.
Yeah,
And
we
thank
don't
you
want
all for spending some time with us. And again, for all you're doing to change your communities in the world, and look forward to gathering again soon.
All right. See you guys.